Coming up on this episode, the 5 biggest roster needs for the Warriors as they look to respond from their disappointing 2023-24 campaign. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Before we get into the Warriors' 5 biggest roster needs here in the offseason, I want to start the episode by mentioning Corey Homicide Williams, who I've just read has passed away in the last hour or so. I've read in the last hour or so that he's passed away. A sad day, a really sad day for basketball in Australia. Corey, born and raised in New York, but came over here, became a superstar NBL player, won NBL MVP in 2010. But more than that, became a TV analyst and commentator from 2015 onwards, and had an everlasting impact on the game here in Australia. And I think everyone that follows the game here would know who Corey is, would have listened to him talk basketball, and just his promotion of the game has been a huge factor in the growth and support of basketball in Australia. It's been truly unbelievable. So an incredibly sad day for those Australians that follow basketball. And I'm wearing my Tassie Jack Jumpers jersey, kind of in honour of Corey, because his promotion of the game, his advocation of the game here in Australia, has brought the NBL to a point where it is truly, really popular. And without that, there's a really good chance that the NBL obviously wouldn't be in the position it is now. And as a result, the Tassie Jack Jumpers as a franchise perhaps wouldn't exist with the kind of promotion and advocation that Corey brought to the game. So a huge shout out to him. I think we're forever indebted for what he's done for the game here in Australia. And I know I'm not necessarily the biggest NBL fan. Obviously, I follow the NBA first and foremost, but obviously living here in Australia, I do follow it a little bit. And of course, my team, the Tassie Jack Jumpers, won the championship this season. And as they made their way through the finals or the playoffs and eventually to the grand final, and where they beat Melbourne United, after every game, the first thing I was looking forward to was hopping on and checking out Corey's latest podcast and listening to him talk about the game, because his knowledge was fantastic. He had a joy about him, not just obviously of the game, but just him in general. Such a vibrant, positive attitude. Even what he was going through with his cancer, the fact that he was able to bring that vibrancy, to bring that analysis of the game, up until the last. Jack Jumpers won the championship, about 6 weeks ago here. So the fact that he was going through and battling what he was, and still able to provide that analysis and give us something to look forward to listening to was truly unbelievable. And again, it's a sad day for basketball in Australia. And shout out to Corey's friends and family, and hope they're going okay in this difficult time. Onto the NBA. It's a bit difficult after that, but a couple of upsets earlier today, my time here. So the Cavs, a really surprising victory over the Celtics, not just a victory, but a blowout victory in Boston, and then the Mavericks getting it done in Oklahoma City as well, which was an upset, but probably less of an upset, or certainly less of an upset than the Cavs win, and one that I wasn't overly surprised with. I actually think the Mavericks will win this series against Dallas. I just think Luka is on a completely different level, and they're not going to get games like they did from PJ Washington today every time. But I don't know. I just like their group more. I just trust Luka more than Shea. He's got a bit more playoff experience. Kyrie, we know he can make it happen in the big situations, and he was pretty quiet today, but he'll have his games throughout this series. I won't talk too much about the second round here, but my one hot take at the moment I want to get off my chest before Game 3 tomorrow, and that is that I still think the Denver Nuggets will beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm just putting my pick out there. I might have a little bit, I haven't done it yet, but I might have a little bit of a flutter, a little bit of cash on the Nuggets to come back from this 2-0 deficit as they head into Minnesota tomorrow. I just don't think the Timberwolves, I don't think Minnesota is a huge home court advantage necessarily, and I think I just have an irrational confidence in Nikola Jokic, obviously now a 3-time MVP, to figure it out essentially and work out the way that Minnesota are handling them at the moment, which they're putting on a defensive masterclass, and then offensively Ant's doing his thing, Cat's playing really well as well. And, they were able to win game 2 without Rudy. So that's kind of my hot take of this episode, that I think the Nuggets will come back and win. But you can hold me to that. We'll see what happens. Let's get into Warriors basketball. Obviously, not too much happening here at the moment. 5 needs for the Warriors, who obviously 10th place finish this season. I've got a really itchy nose at the moment. Sorry for those on YouTube. 10th place finish in the Western Conference this season. Very disappointing. Clear, glaring holes in the roster that they're going to need to work out during the offseason. So let's go through. I've listed 5 here. I'm going to do an article on Blue Man Hoop for it over the next couple of days as well. But you guys listening to this episode or watching on YouTube, get it first. Number 1, need to re-sign Klay Thompson. And I know, the Magic interest is there, reportedly mutual interest, according to Shams earlier in the week. However, what he means to the franchise, and not just that, but the need for shooting on this team and the lack of it this season outside of Steph and Klay, they need to re-sign Klay. And you've just got to look at the fact there's no way to replace him if he just leaves. There's no cap space. Yes, they can try and get under not only the second tax apron, but the whole luxury tax altogether. Yes, but is it there's no way to replace him? You cannot give the $25 million you're going to give to Klay Thompson, to someone else. And I think that's the key here, is that you need to bring this guy back. Now, yes, it could get to a point where it's silly money. And if that's the case, then I'm not going to blame the franchise if they walk away and say, hey, you know what, Klay, you want to go to the Orlando Magic for 2 years, $75 million? We're not going to match that. You go ahead and do that. I understand that. But if I'm the Warriors, you just need to re-sign him. And I'd push anything upwards of, I think $30 million is probably the cutoff point. I think anything up to $30 million, you just got to do it. You just have to. And then anything above that, you've obviously got to have a serious consideration. And anything above that, you may look at going the other way and saying, Klay, it's been great, but if you truly want that kind of money, we don't think you're worth that. In fact, the entire league, except for Orlando, thinks you're not really worth that. We're going to walk away. And I won't blame the franchise for that. But, these people are saying that, he should accept something less than $20 million. It's just not going to happen. It's just not. And the franchise needs to understand. They offered him 2 years, 48 at the start of the season. I still think that's about right. Former head coach Mark Jackson came out on Gilbert Arenas' podcast and said $20 to $25 million range. And that is, I think that's the general consensus, that Klay is worth $20 to $25 million. And I think that's ultimately what should get it done. But of course, his contract is going to be based on what the market is willing to pay. And if the Magic are willing to come in with a huge contract, then that could push the Warriors up to paying between 25 and 30. But we'll just wait and see. And it's obviously going to depend on what the priorities are for Klay. But I think the Warriors just do need to re-sign him first and foremost. Number 2, the whole Chris Paul situation and organising a kind of backup point guard if CP3, obviously he's got that $30 million non-guaranteed deal for next season, which the Warriors will either waive and make him an unrestricted free agent. They could try and bring him back on a lower number, but I'm not sure why CP3 will necessarily do that. I think there's other teams he could go to where he could have potentially more impact and be closer to a championship. Or they could guarantee his contract up to a certain point and trade him for another piece. So we'll wait and see what happens there. I'd be highly surprised if they guarantee his contract and keep him for the season, or even keep him up until next year's mid-season trade deadline. So if CP3 does depart, let's say the Warriors waive him and he becomes an unrestricted free agent and he leaves, or if they trade him elsewhere and they don't get a point guard in return, then what do you look at from a Warrior standpoint in terms of your backup point guard situation? Because I think it would be unfair to see Brandon Pajemski all of a sudden throwing the keys as, hey, you are our point guard in the non-Steph minutes. He's got potential of that down the line, and if worse comes to worse, that's not a disastrous scenario, but I don't think it's a fair one for Pods. I think he's still a combo guard as such at this stage. By the sounds of it, he's going to play in Summer League, which is interesting, and maybe part of that is giving him the ball on a permanent basis and letting him be the point guard in Summer League and see how he handles that. But there's clearly a big difference between what he's going to play in some league where he should really dominate given what he did in his rookie season. It's far different doing that compared to going on an NBA floor next season and running an NBA offense for 15, 20 minutes when Steph Curry's off the floor. And I think that would be an unfair situation to put him into. And so what do you look at? I think it would have to be a trade. It would have to be a trade because you look at some of the free agent options here at the point guard position who are on minimum kind of money. Like, who are we looking at here? Westbrook, Tyus Jones, you're probably not going to be able to afford. Conley, you would assume he's going to stay with Minnesota. Spencer Dinwiddie, Markelle Fultz, Reggie Jackson, Kyle Lowry, like Patrick Beverley's not a point guard as such. DeLon Wright, Monte Morris, Aaron Holiday, Dennis Smith Jr., Cam Payne. The names aren't great. Let's be honest. Like, if worst comes to worst, would you take a Reggie Jackson? I don't know. You look at the numbers of Denver's bench this season, not great. And Reggie Jackson's a big part of that. Would you take Kyle Lowry? Maybe, but why would he come to the Warriors necessarily? Would you take a DeLon Wright? Maybe. Had a big game one for Miami against the Celtics a couple of weeks ago in their first round series. Monte Morris, maybe, but like we're really scraping at the bottom of the barrel here, and they're not great options, particularly when you've come off a season where you've had Chris Paul, a 12-time All-Star, future Hall of Famer, the point guard, who, yes, didn't necessarily help the Warriors from an overall standpoint, in fact of missing the playoffs, but he was good for the Warriors. Let's make no mistake about that. He was legitimately good for the Warriors, and if they lose him, it's going to be highly unlikely that they can bring in a backup point guard that's anywhere near as good unless it's via trade. And that's why, like, I'm still interested in DeJounte Murray. In the case of, I wouldn't give up Jonathan Kuminga or a whole lot for him necessarily, which I think I saw a hypothetical trade on Bleacher Report that had the Warriors getting DeJounte Murray but giving up Kuminga, and I just wouldn't do that. But I do like the idea of DeJounte Murray in terms of he's a guy that will be able to run your offense a little bit. He's not necessarily a number one point guard necessarily, but I think he'd be capable, if you have Murray Pods backcourt for, 15, 20 minutes a game without Steph, I think that's reasonable. The other one I saw was like, could you go to the Nets and get Dennis Schroeder? I saw another mock trade with Mikal Bridges and Dennis Schroeder in a deal. I'm not a huge Schroeder fan, but he's kind of been okay the past few seasons after it looked like he might have been out of the league at one point there. Wouldn't be the worst necessarily, but again, I'm not a huge fan of him. I also don't think he's a Warrior style player by any means. I just get that feeling more than anything. So in terms of the backup point guard position, the Warriors are clearly going to have options right now that they're looking at. They've clearly probably going to have an idea right now on what they're going to do with Chris Paul, and they're going to have some insurance options, depending on what happens with him. And, they might need to look at a backup point guard from a trade perspective because, as I spoke about before with the free agents, not a great list of guys there. Number 3, front court shooting. This is something the Warriors have really lacked, and we've always been looking for the Otto Porter Jr. replacement ever since he left after the championship season in 2022. They just haven't been able to find it. Have not been able to find it. They tried with JaMychal Green, failed. They tried with Dario Saric, started well, failed. They need to, when you've got Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond Green, and Trace Jackson Davis as 3 of your front court options, and you've got Andrew Wiggins, who are we going into a season expecting him to shoot high 30% from 3-point range? I don't know. Like, I just don't think we can trust in that at this point. There's also a good chance that Wiggs is off the team. So I just think this is a need that the Warriors are going to have to look at in the offseason. Obviously, they're probably going to have, again, minimal financial flexibility to be able to go and sign someone in for agency. And this is also why someone like a KD or a Larry Markkinen are really the dream and like the top end dream trade scenarios for the Warriors, because they not only are they superstar players, or I wouldn't say Markkinen's a superstar, but he's a star, but they fit what the Warriors need in terms of shooting in the front court when you've got Kuminga, Draymond, Jackson Davis. Like, we're not going to go into next season expecting Draymond to shoot 40% from three again, are we? Like, that's an anomaly based on what he's done in the past 7 or 8 seasons of his career. And so I'm not going to go into next season expecting him to shoot that number again. Kuminga, obviously, it's a work in progress. His 3-point jump shot at different times, it's looked good. Again, he's not going to be a high volume guy by any means. I don't think he's ever going to be a 40% 3-point shooter by any means. And so it's clearly an aspect they're going to need to look at again in terms of like other options outside of those, top tier Durant, Markkanen, which, many would just see as a dream and not actually any chance of happening in reality. But I mean, are you looking at Kelly Olynyk's a free agent? You're probably not going to, you're going to have to get out of the tax to have access to the mid-level exception or whatever to be able to get your hands anywhere close to him. Kevin Love is a player the Warriors have had interest in the past, but again, getting on with age, certainly nowhere near his prime, but again, as a stretch big, may be able to play a role. And Nick Batum is probably the ideal one. Now, I'm not sure what's going on with him, given that I think it was his wife, like last year or whatever, said that this was going to be his last season in the NBA and that he was going to retire from the NBA. I'm not sure if that's still the case or not. Now, obviously, he got traded from the Clippers to the 76ers mid-season. He was really good for them in the playoffs. He was really good. Obviously, they lost their first-round series to the Knicks, but he was excellent. And I think he would probably be, he's a guy that the Warriors have had interest in the past. I think he'd be the ideal player because he's someone who you could foreseeably put into your closing lineup. And I think that's the ideal thing from a Warriors perspective is, can we get a guy who could actually close games for us if the situation arises where that's needed, where there's a situation where you can't have Draymond and TJD on the floor together, or you can't have Draymond and JK on the floor together. So I think that's, whether it's a superstar talent like a KD or a star player like Markkanen, or it's a cheap free agent option, you just got to try and get someone there who can provide a little bit more than what JaMychal Green and Dario Saric have in the last 2 seasons, where those guys, I know JaMychal Green played a little bit in the playoffs against the Lakers in the second round, but that was a desperation move from Steve Kerr, and really neither of those two players, Green or Saric, were in the rotation for much of the second half of the season in the last couple of years. The number 4 one I've got here, more shooting off the bench and just more shooting in general, and this goes back to why you just cannot get rid of Clay, I think, under any circumstances, unless Orlando pay him something stupid. There's just not enough shooting on this roster. I've just said it. If you're not going to trust Moses Moody, if he's going to go into next season again as a guy who, you're not going to necessarily play 20-plus minutes a game. Now, opportunities could arise for him if one of Clay or Wiggins leave or whatever. But if you cannot guarantee Moses Moody, 20-plus minutes, then I don't know where the shooting comes from off the bench. And again, you can move Clay back there, but who you start, like your starting pods, well, then there's a lack of shooting in the starting lineup. Like, what are you doing? And so, you look at the guys that are contracted for next season, coming off the bench, Pods, 38.5% 3-point shooter this season was really good. Again, not necessarily a high volume guy. We had a lot of frustration throughout the season with his lack of 3-point attempts and often passing up on open looks. It's clearly something he's going to work on in the offseason. Will he ever become an elite shooter or a great shooter by any means? Probably not. Like a high volume guy, unlikely, I would have thought. GP2, obviously teams are going to leave him open. Looney's the center. Both those guys, GP2's got a player option for next season. Looney a non-guaranteed deal. And then Moody, again, as well, is the other guy who are you going to commit to playing him 20-plus minutes? Because he's the one guy who can foreseeably get to a high 30% 3-point percentage on reasonable volume and will take any kind of good look that's available to him. So even if you do commit to giving Moody 20 minutes a game, I still think you're going to need more shooting on this roster. And again, it goes down to that front court scenario that I just spoke about. You're going to need another option there, and I think also just someone else off the bench, like another 2-3, another wing. Again, we're going to go into next season thinking that Wiggins can be that guy and be a guy that shoots nearly 40% from three. I just don't see it. And so you need some kind of insurance there. Even if it's a guy like, I'm just saying here, like the Celtics have with Sam Hauser. who is just a sniper off the bench who, yes, his minutes may fluctuate. Yes, there's going to be games where he plays 5 to 8 minutes. There might be other games where he plays 12 to 15. But just a guy that if you need some spacing out there, can come out and be an option for you. And, he's played a role at times for the Celtics this season and continues to in the playoffs. And the final one I've got here, I've gone kind of through these very quickly. Obviously, we're going to delve more into this kind of stuff as the offseason progresses, as more news and reports come out on who the Warriors could be interested in or who becomes available via trade. But the last one is a genuine defensive-minded 7-footer. Now, this one's difficult because obviously we love what TJD did this season. We want to try and give the keys to him at center as much as possible, and really excited for what he can do in the next few years. 6'9" only, yes, no jump shot. That kind of limits where he can get to, but incredibly athletic, shot blocking presence, rim protecting presence, obviously a lob and rim running threat on the offensive end as well. Like, we love what he did in his rookie season, but as much as we want to go into next season and hopefully have a role for him to play 20, 25 minutes a game, you've also got to ask yourself, if the Warriors have true hopes of rebuilding this roster around Steph Curry, of trying to get back to the playoffs and trying to get deep into the playoffs, then you look at these Western Conference teams that are remaining right now. You've got Jokic, obviously, who is impossible to defend as it is, 3-time MVP, we get it. But who do the Warriors actually have that would even be close to being able to guard him? You look at the Timberwolves with Gobert, Cat, Naz Reid. How would the Warriors combat that? You look at the Thunder with Chet Holmgren, who's only going to get better. And so you've got those three teams at the top of the Western Conference who you'd be very surprised if they go anywhere, kind of thing. And if the Warriors want to try and get into that group, they're going to need someone who can be an insurance option for them when they come up against those teams. Even if, ideally you want to play TJD at the 5 as much as you can, and you want to play Draymond next to JK at the 4 and the 5 or something like that. You need someone there. Again, I don't know who that is because, as I said, like Jokic, no one can really defend him. But the Timberwolves right now are having a very good time of it with their double big combination where they play, two bigs pretty much all the time with Gobert, Cat, and Naz Reid. So that's kind of what the Warriors need to look. And again, I don't know what the options are. I don't know who would be available in France. Like, do you go and get Andre Drummond from the Bulls or something? Like, it's not going to be a sexy option by any means. It's why the franchise probably looked at Dwight Howard in going back to the preseason or training camp last year. This is a need that the Warriors have had. They haven't had a 7-footer on the roster, if I'm correct. They haven't had a 7-footer on the roster since Wiseman. And he departed, February last year. So we're now, what are we in? We're 15, 16, nearing on 18 months where the Warriors haven't had a 7-footer on their roster. And it's just a hole they need to fill. They need to have someone, doesn't matter if it's end of the bench, whatever it is, to, worst comes to worst, let's throw this guy out there, just put size on the floor, because you've seen, the size, the athleticism of some of these teams in the playoffs, I think would just absolutely belt up on the Warriors. And that's ultimately why they struggled this season, or a part of why they struggled this season and end up finishing 10th in the Western Conference. So we'll finish it up there. 5 needs for the Warriors. Need to re-sign Clay, organise backup point guard spot if CP3 leaves. The front court shooting, the shooting in general, and particularly off the bench as well. And then the need for a genuine defensive-minded 7-footer. As I said before, though, we'll get into it a whole lot more as the off-season progresses and as the speculation and the reports heat up as well. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter /X. Leave me a comment there or a comment on YouTube letting me know what you think the Warriors need this offseason as they look to bounce back from their disappointing year. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a great weekend ahead, and I'll see you on the next episode.